opportunities of the global economy. I kind of asked through my Instagram account, what's your biggest worries? And Instagram is what, 30, 20 plus years, I guess. What's your biggest worries about the current economy? And they said, the prices of makeup. That's the best answer, I guess. And then I got answers like the prices of chili. We Indonesians eat chili a lot. I know that because I spend a lot for my wife's chili consumption. And I enjoy it too, I'll have to say. So those are some of the worries of our economy. So while we wait for the others to come in, I want to ask you some questions about the economy. First of all, who believes here? Just raise your hand. You know, it's okay. I won't ask you to step out just because you gave the wrong answer. Just raise your hand. Who believes here we should actually raise the tax and let the government, have some more money to do or build stuff for us? Who believes here? Or give like a health support for us? Better benefits for the people. Who believes here? You, sir. You, ma'am, in the back. You too. You don't mind you do pay taxes, right? Okay, because if you don't pay taxes, you don't have a word here about raising the taxes. Come on. And another question is, it's hard that only a few actually believe in raising the taxes to help the economy. Another one is the demographic dividend that we believe, and you would be part of, I believe, some of you would be part of, probably me too if I could still work by then. In 2013, bonus demografi, the demographic dividend, who believes that would be a time for Indonesia to skyrocket? Who believes it's a good thing? Only you? Only you? Who believes? I'm going to ask one more time, just in case you don't get the question right. Who believes that the demographic dividend would be the booster for our economy? We'll see unprecedented growth in 2030. Who believes that? Do I see 50%? I don't think so. So who believes that a bonus demographic, the demographic dividend, would actually be a burden because we have so many young people out of work, not knowing where to get their income, unskilled people? Who believes it's going to be a burden? I think I see more. I don't know. I think you too. You too. And you're like the good young person and you believe that. Come on. So it's troubling that something so big should actually be a burden for us. But it might be true if you don't take the right step. Now, one final question. Who believes that the Game of Thrones wasn't the best way to describe the way of the world now? We see here, fix the broken world. Who believes I could give a better example? Who believes that? Who could give a better example? Nobody. Every time I ask for example, nobody raises their hands. Maybe Tersanjung, Game of Thrones is like what, 76 episodes? Tersanjung is like 360. Talk about sustainability, right? And talk about the workforce involved in making 360 episodes. Game of Thrones, you're nothing, So who believes that, yes, we're trying to fix the broken world? Okay, who believes the world is already broken? I would be opening the panel, and also I'd be letting everyone here, well, not everyone, I give some of you, but everyone has the same chance, just as long as you raise your hand to ask a question. I'd like to talk about not just addressing the problems, because we will be addressing the problems about the economy, but please offer a solution as well. Of course, you could ask about, hey, I'm really worried about this, can you talk about this? Please do, but if you have a solution, that's great. Bagi yang butuh penerjemah atau alat untuk menerjemahkan ada di belakang. Jadi silakan langsung diambil saja di belakang. I don't know how many they have, tapi selama masih ada, langsung diambil di belakang aja. So I'm gonna invite 4 panelists here. The first one is the former Secretary of Finance from the Republic of Philippines. Please welcome Cesar Purisima. Please give them another round of applause for Mr. Purisima.
Good afternoon, everyone. How many of you have been to the Philippines? Well, the Philippines is actually the closest northern neighbor in the Celebes Sea of Indonesia, but it's much smaller than Indonesia. But the Philippines and Indonesia are the two biggest countries in ASEAN. Without Indonesia, actually ASEAN would be nothing. So we refer to you Indonesians as our big brother in ASEAN. That's why when Padino invited me to speak, I said, yes sir, Padino, I will be here in Indonesia. The topic that I was asked to talk about together with my fellow panelists is quite broad. And basically the question is what we think are the challenges in the global economy. So I'll start off by talking from a very high level, 50,000 feet, and identify what I think are the key challenges over the next few years. And the number one, for me, the number one problem we have right now, who among you use Twitter? Okay. Who among you follow Donald Trump in Twitter? That is our problem number one. Donald Trump using his Twitter. I call it the Trump Twitter tantrum. Basically, he likes to tweet, no? And he doesn't even think through what he's saying, but he's the president of the most powerful country in the world. And basically in his campaign, he said that he was going to challenge the order of things in global trade. And that's what he's done. He's basically identified China as enemy number one. And so far, it's been a tit for tat. He started with 34 billion. China also identified 34 billion that it was going to increase the tariff on. Right now, the US is at 250 billion of goods that it imports from China that it will impose tariff on of about 25%. China is actually at a disadvantage because the total imports of China from the US is much less, which is about 130 billion. And that is where I think we might have a problem, because right now it's tit for tat. China is already at close to 100% of its imports from the US that it's imposing tariff on. And if the US continues to increase or ratchet up the pressure, this might spill over to other aspects of their relationship. The US, for example, has a surplus when it comes to trade in services. The US has a surplus with China when it comes to tourism, when it comes to students studying in China. The US has a surplus in terms of US companies that are actually operating in China, making money in China, compared to Chinese companies making money in the US. What I'm saying is this is a race to the bottom. And we have the largest developed country in the world in the US, the largest developing country in the world in China, basically two elephants fighting in a race to the bottom. And us, the smaller countries around both of them, can actually be disadvantaged, we can actually suffer. For ASEAN in particular, if we don't navigate it carefully, we can actually end up a loser in this fight. Although there is a silver lining for us. Assuming they continue to impose tariffs on each other and end up imposing high tariffs on all imports, those operating in China might decide to relocate their plants in ASEAN. And in fact, I think we've seen some already move to Vietnam, to Thailand, to Malaysia, maybe some to Indonesia and some to the Philippines. Because ASEAN is considered non-threatening. No? So that's one risk that I've identified, the Trump-Twitter tantrum on trade that can pose a problem to the rest of the world given the size of the countries that are fighting. In fact, the US just renegotiated NAFTA, and it included two unusual provisions in NAFTA. First, if Canada and Mexico or any one of them negotiates a free trade deal with a non-market economy, and that's quote-unquote China, the other members of NAFTA has 1 month to review and can actually withdraw from the deal in 6 months. So basically, that is a way to try and isolate China. It also has a provision that says that the countries must make the market determine their exchange rates. So I hope this is not just the beginning. No, I hope this is closer to the end. But unfortunately, I think if they continue this tit for tat game, this can get worse before it becomes better. And the sad thing is that all of us, all the countries generally of the world, have improved our standards of living because of trade. ASEAN in particular, we are one of the biggest beneficiaries to global trade. In fact, over 2/3 of our trade is through free trade agreements. Just one last point before I go to the other risk. I really don't understand why President Trump is so worried about the trade deficit to China. Because how many of you know that the global reserve currency is the US dollar? How many of you know that? So not a lot know that. So the dollar is the one currency that is accepted by everyone around the world, right? So how much does it cost the US government to print one $100 bill? Just a few cents, right? To finance its deficits, it just has to print this green box that's referred to the dollar. And that's what it has to pay other countries. Whereas countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, China, the lesser countries have to produce real goods to be able to pay for our deficit. So I don't really understand why it's so concerned, plus the fact that it has surpluses in other aspects of trade. So that's the first risk that I think is something that we should watch carefully, and hopefully we as a global community will be able to resolve on a win-win manner. The second, and I'm not going to drill down a lot on this because we have a lot of other speakers, is the fact that the US Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the US, has been increasing its interest rates from practically zero, after the global economic crisis. It's increased its interest rates 8 times already. And they plan to increase it 1 more time this year, 3 more times next year, and maybe until 2020. And plus the fact that since the global financial crisis, the total debt of the world has increased to over $247 trillion. That's a lot of dollars. Indonesia is a 1 trillion economy. You multiply that by 247 times. That's the total stock of debt. So just imagine if you increase the cost of that debt, generally everyone, the whole global economy will suffer. It's like putting an anchor on a boat. So I'm told to shut up already. So it's like an anchor that will slow down the global economy. So that's the other risk. The third risk is oil prices. Indonesia used to be an exporter of oil, but now it imports oil. The world consumes about 36 billion barrels of oil a year. The oil price has moved from a low of $30 in 2016 to about $80 now. So that's about 1.8 trillion additional cost to the global economy. The fourth risk that I've identified is the fact that the US, which is the largest market of the world, is probably on the tail end of its long economic growth cycle, the second longest now in its history. The stock market is also on its probably longest bull run. And as you know, nothing good lasts forever. And a lot of people are now looking at that, and that's spooking the stock market. And that's why the US stock market has been going down. And this crisis in the stock markets can actually make those concerns a self-fulfilling reality. So these are serious challenges that we face in the global economy, especially if they add up to each other. That might end up not just as global headwinds, but a perfect economic storm. Add to that the fact that we're in a world that is in transition to the fourth industrial revolution. That one, I think, is both a challenge and an opportunity for us. But there's so many moving parts. Just imagine yourself, juggling so many pieces. So we live in a very challenging world. But my last word is this: despite these challenges, we should, Indonesia, Philippines, the rest of ASEAN, should look at all of this as an opportunity for us, so long as we focus on our fundamentals and take stock of our advantages. Tim mentioned demographic dividend, but the other advantage of ASEAN is the fact that we are right at the center of the most dynamic economic region the world will see in the next many years. From Bangkok, 1/2 of the world's middle class is within 6 hours flight. And our own middle class is increasing. So these are the consuming engines of the world. So positive demography, right location, consumption, these are opportunities for us to actually be able to take advantage of, so long as we focus and navigate carefully the challenges that I've mentioned. Anyway, 7 minutes is too short to talk about this. I have very good co-panelists who will definitely drill down on some of the points that I mentioned and probably add more. So again, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Purisima. Please have a seat. Anyway, I made a mistake, so I had to actually invite everyone first. Yeah, and I misbriefed everyone here. I need to miscommunication. This is why we should, try to communicate better. So I would like to invite all the panelists up on the stage. Please give a warm applause to the former United States Ambassador to Vietnam, Michalak. And also, applause to the Economist from Bank of China, Tristan, Zhuo. And the next panelist will be World Bank's lead country economist for Indonesia, Mr. Frederico Sanders. Please give another applause to everyone. I welcome you to the stage. Michael, please stay here because you'll be the next speaker here. So Tristan, please have a seat. And Frederico, please join me on the seat. So next one is Michael. Please give another round of applause to Michael.
Well, hi everybody, and thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come here to talk to you about the risks and opportunities in the global economy today. Well, I'm from the US-ASEAN Business Council, and the first thing I want to say is I agree with the first threat that Cesar mentioned. That's a huge threat. And I hope you guys can do something about it, because we don't seem to be able to do anything about it in the US. But you have to keep in mind that I am not anymore with the US government. So Besides that, I think that the state of the global economy depends on your viewpoint in looking at it. The IMF at the recent Bank Fund meeting came out with a global growth figure of about 3.7% growth for the coming year, and that's not too bad. I don't know if your cosmetics are going to go down. They'll probably go up a bit, but you know, it's still not too bad. The U.S. economy is showing a robust growth rate of near 4% in the most recent quarter, but most economists seem to think that the effects of the tax cut are going to wear off and growth is going to settle down around 3% for the rest of the year, and that's still not too bad. China is showing some effects of the trade war with the United States as its third quarter growth slowed to about a mere 6.5%. But I think a lot of our governments would really be happy with a mere 6.5% economic growth. On the other hand, while businesses and the population seem to be generally optimistic in the United States about the future of the economy, even though the volatility in the stock market is really something to behold, I think the old bull has still got some life in it, and the markets seem to be coming back. But even though the many Americans are still optimistic, not quite true in China. China producers and consumers are showing some signs of pessimism in some of the surveys that are coming out, which does not bode well for future growth rates in the world's second largest economy. And we're also hearing from the IMF, the World Bank, and others that Asia, in particularly Southeast Asia, is likely to continue to grow at a respectable 5 to 6% growth in the short term. So, you know, overall, that's not, you know, it's not the bright shining light on the hill, but it's not winter either. So I think I could have come up with maybe something better than the Game of Thrones but the president did. I mean, President Zhuo he had the most attention at the WEF when he started that speech. Let me tell you, everybody was focusing on him saying, well, you know, we have a paradigm here from the Game of Thrones. And it was just great. But at the same time that we get this kind of mixed messages on the growth front, we're also hearing that across Asia, the crazy rich middle class continues to grow, providing potential markets for consumer goods all over the region as the demographic dividend, which I think is a good thing, continues to play out. There is, of course, somewhat of a darker side to the growth stories that we're hearing, since infrastructure spending is falling way behind needs, not only in Jakarta and Manila, where traffic jams are legendary, but also in the United States, where infrastructure spending in the hundreds of billions of dollars is also needed and has been promised by both political parties, but has yet to materialize. Now, furthermore, the rising middle class now expects more from its governments, not only in terms of the infrastructure and other physical signs of a growing economy and maturing nation states, but also in terms of social infrastructure like social welfare safety nets and more and better access to reasonable levels of health care. Sure, you don't want your taxes to go up, but you still want to be able to go to a bright, spanking new hospital and have excellent medical care. So, and in many countries, these wonderful 5 and 6% growth rates does not seem to be translating into budget numbers that allow for these expectations to be met. And this has created some tensions within societies, which has led to some very interesting election campaigns throughout the region. So, it's against this backdrop of sort of good and not so good news that we wonder, what are the prospects for opportunities and challenges going forward? But here, I think we've got some really exciting things to talk about. Now, I have to say, Cesar, I thought, was a bit dark in talking about the oil price and the Fed and the U.S. boom ending. I don't think it's quite all that bad. I do think that the Fed seems to know what it's doing. The debt numbers are large all around the world, that's true, and that is a cause of concern. But the fact that everybody is still working, that you still have a rising middle class, and that you still have a demographic dividend argues for continued welfare going up around the world. But to talk about opportunities and challenges, the first one I'm going to go to is the last one that Cesar met. He called it the Industrial Revolution 4.0. I call it the digital economy. And pretty soon we're not going to be calling it the digital economy anymore. It's just going to be the economy. And I've only got 1 minute. Ha! Okay. So anyway, all I'm going to say about that, I guess, is that it is the best thing that we have coming around the corner since sliced bread. I mean, the digital economy is going to enable us to eliminate boundaries in trade. It's going to make MSMEs fantastically profitable because they will now have borders eliminated, and they can reach out to markets in the United States, in Europe, in Latin America, all over the world. If we get the regulatory reform or the regulatory framework right. Let me go down here a little bit further. But there are some problems with the economy, some of the challenges. Cybersecurity, of course. Fake news, another big challenge, and also privacy. These are things that we have to work out, but that's what people like me do and people like on the stage do. We work with governments to try and find that balance between what the government needs and what the private sector needs. Let me go to two more things here. One is a trade war, which you might not exactly call an opportunity, since in the long run, everybody is going to be worse off. But having said that, you know, you can look at the US-China trade war now as not so much a real battle as perhaps a realignment. And what I mean by that is that early on in China's development, many around the trading world expected that China would become a responsible stakeholder. And that hasn't worked out exactly the way that we figured. And so there have to be some adjustments that are made. And I think what is going to be happening is that you're going to see the interdependence between China and the United States go down. And that will not be a one-time thing, that will be a permanent thing. And as a result, people are going to be looking, as Cesar hinted, that people are going to be looking for new supply chains. Supply chains are already being shifted, and we're already seeing a lot of interest in Vietnam and a lot of interest in other countries around the region. How these countries participate in the digital economy is going to be one of the major factors in determining whether or not you're going to get the investment in the China Plus One strategy. Finally, the other challenge which I want to bring out is one which you have all been dealing with here more than any place else, and that's climate change. And here again is where I will agree with Cesar, his first threat. Nobody in Balu thinks that climate change is a Chinese plot. So I think that these are some of the things that we have to think about. And what can we do about it? Well, this is, I know I'm going over. I'll try not to go over too far. But it is ASEAN. ASEAN is probably the one thing here that is another bright light in Southeast Asia. It's ASEAN centrality helps out in allowing ASEAN to be the middle ground between the two elephants that we're talking about. ASEAN centrality, when you're looking at supply chain shifting around, a more integrated ASEAN all of a sudden makes a whole lot of sense. The ASEAN single window is a reality, albeit not at a very high level. But concentrated efforts on the part of the members would make ASEAN even more attractive to people looking for a China Plus One strategy. Indonesia, as the largest market, would become an excellent candidate for more foreign direct investment, as well as because it's a huge market, as well as being an excellent base from which to enter the other 9 markets. Indonesia's 1,000 Startups program shows a real effort to set up an ecosystem that, with the right regulatory framework, would keep entrepreneurs here in Indonesia rather than going to other countries where they can the environment is more conducive to their digital dreams. Indonesia has also been in the forefront of oceans, building consensus in APEC on oceans and around the world on oceans policy, and could work within ASEAN on things like plastic in the oceans. Indonesia also plays a key role in the G20 and several interfaith organizations. So we've got so many things going for Indonesia here. I think that there are plenty of ways, in spite of some of the challenges that we mentioned, we've got plenty of ways in which Indonesia can have a very bright future in a multipolar world. And sorry for taking so much time.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks, Mike. The next speaker is the economist from the Bank of China, Tristan. Zhuo, please welcome Tristan. Immediately severed your connection with Trump's regulations. Yeah, Mike. Okay, yeah, I'll talk to him. No, you immediately severed your connection with whatever Trump's decision was. Right? Okay. So please, Mr. Zhuo.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm not going to talk about trade war because a lot of people have already talked about it. My topic is actually going to be the aftermath of unconventional monetary policy, because I think this topic will have an even more far-reaching and long-lasting impact on the world economy in the next 3 to 5 years. And also, for another reason, is that I think most of the issues the world is currently facing right now could be at least partially traced back to what happened after the financial crisis. So what do I mean by unconventional monetary policy? And then we can go to the first slide. It's really a grand monetary experiment that had never been tried before prior to the financial crisis. So after the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, what happened is that the United States, the Eurozone, Japan, and quite a few other Western central banks, they all lowered benchmark interest rates to zero, or in some instances even below zero. So theoretically, zero should be the lower bound of interest rates. So what happened afterwards is that they cannot lower interest rates further. So while interest rates could not go any lower, they then carried out quantitative easing programs, or QE, or printing money, in other words. So basically multiplying their central bank balance sheets by many times. So it's printing money, and then they buy assets, and then so their balance sheets really went up by many times. So this chart here actually depicts the central bank balance sheets as a percentage of GDP for all the major Western central banks in US and Europe, and also in Japan. You can see that the chart is really, this chart is really impressive in the sense that after the financial crisis, all three lines jumped through the roof. And then we can see that the blue line for the United States, it went up from about 5% at the beginning of the current century to about 20% right now. And then for the Eurozone, and then it went up from about 10% to 40% right now. For Japan, before it's about 20% at its lowest point in the current century. Right now it's about 100%. So basically what happened is that it's a grand monetary experiment that had never been tried before, but it has been tried in the past, in the last decade in many parts of the world, all across the globe. So basically, it's a very grand monetary experiment. However, at what cost? And that's the second slide I have here. Next slide, please. So the cost of this monetary experiment is really, I think it's threefold, and then it also has to do with many of the world issues we're facing today. Because most of our present issues are at least partially a result of ultra-accommodative monetary policy. We can talk about debt, we can talk about low productivity, we can talk about income or wealth inequality. So first we can talk about debt. What happened after the crisis is that actually we are, or most policymakers, they are encouraging borrowers to borrow even more. And then, in other words, curing a problem created by too much debt by creating even more debt. So basically, when you lower interest rate to zero, so when you lower interest rate to zero, so basically you encourage people to take on more debt, and then that's why the former financial secretary of the Philippines already said that right now we are having $250 trillion of debt worldwide, and then that really threatens financial stability. And then the other is productivity. And in many parts of the world, we are complaining that productivity is rising too slow, and then it's not really creating more opportunities for the younger generation, and then the world economy is not growing at a fast enough pace. But why is that? We talk about we encourage taking more debt, but at the same time that we are punishing savings when we are not paying any interest to households. We punish savings, and that is also the source of investment. And also financial engineering becomes even more lucrative than capital spending in a time of 0% interest rates and QE and printed money consistently. So basically what happened is that one of the audience talked about human resources, and then we talk about really how we should try to improve economic growth. But quantitative easing or unconventional policy really encourage the opposite side of investment. We are encouraging financial engineering. By that, we're talking about maybe borrowing money to do mergers and acquisition. We are borrowing money to buy back public stocks of companies. We are borrowing money to pay more dividends. So basically, all this financial engineering become more lucrative than really doing real-world investment when interest rates are so low and the cost of funds are so low. So that's the second point. The third point I have here is inequality. We talk about inequality deteriorating in many parts of the world, but one of the major reasons is that excessive liquidity really artificially boosts asset prices. We talk about stock prices going up a lot in many parts of the world, and also stock prices, property prices. So asset prices are really benefiting from excessive liquidity in the system. However, no income households, they also suffer from inflation disproportionately, which is another side effect of excessive liquidity. And also that really widen the gap between the rich and the poor, because rich people, they are automatically becoming richer because they have a lot of assets to begin with. But that is a privilege that the other households do not have. So basically, most of the most pressing issues today, we're talking about debt, low productivity, and also income inequality. They can at least partially be traced back to what happened after the financial crisis. So what can we do about that? Great, structural reforms. That's the last slide I have here. I think structural reforms are really sorely needed because we talk about unconventional monetary policy, but really fiscal and monetary policy, they only provide a temporary boost. It's not going to be very useful in the long term. However, the costs are long term, as we have already just witnessed. So basically, some of the theories or prescriptions I have here is that really monetary policy should be prudent, striving to maintain price stability instead of really propping up the economy or propping up asset prices persistently. And then the other suggestion I have here is that probably tax policy also needs to be reformed. It should be simpler, and tax rates should not be excessive. Really striking the balance between public spending and private purchasing power. And also another point that could be improved is the labor market rules, because in many parts of the world, unemployment rates are still higher than their historical average. One of the reasons that the labor market rules actually are too rigid, and also we need to loosen some of the rules so as to encourage hiring. One of the last suggestions I have here is that industry regulation should be sensible and not overly stringent so as to improve market dynamism and also innovation. So that's all I have today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tristan. He is the World Bank's lead country economist for Indonesia. Now, just a little story, Frederico, before you start. We all envied him for wearing a batik because it was really warm in that room. And it's really freezing here, so Frederico, with your batik and so anyway, please.
Thank you very much. Selamat siang, bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu. I always like to start with a few words in Bahasa. Usually I can do 1 minute. Today I have to keep it shorter because we have only 7 minutes. But I think that the good thing is that I can summarize some of the points that have been made by my previous colleagues, and then we can have some good discussion. Because I think that some of the themes, they're fairly well recognized in terms of where we are on the opportunities and risks with the current global economic situation. And where I think that hopefully we can add some twists, and especially from the perspective of the World Bank, where we look at kind of long-term growth and poverty reduction issues, is to look at current tendencies as well as some of the long-term trends. So today's global economy, I think that we've heard about trade wars. I very much like Secretary Purisima's alliteration of being aware of Trump's Twitter tantrum on trade. That's a tongue twister for all of us to practice. The giant sucking sound of the Federal Reserve taking in dollars back into its vaults and away from countries like Indonesia, as well as contagion from other emerging markets. So I think that we've heard a lot about the trade wars and the trade tensions. The global trade regime has actually helped the world live through a period of fairly unprecedented prosperity, and I think that we now see a lot of tension in terms of where the global trade is going. And some of that, I think, reflecting the fact that in many parts of the world there have been people that were left behind by this globalization. Globalization has been good on average. Economists love to talk about averages, but the reality is that many individuals within those averages have not done so well, and I think that we see a lot of political backlash against trade. And the question is, should we throw the whole baby with the bathwater, or should we try to keep what is good about the global trading system while trying to do better to address those that have been left behind? Now, going back to the theme that also my previous colleagues in the panel have discussed, which is about monetary policy. And the giant sucking sound that's the sound of the Federal Reserve. You saw from the chart of how they've expanded their balance sheet, they've reduced interest rates to zero. Now the economy is doing better. We see that inflation is going up and unemployment is down. The US is running very large fiscal deficits, so a lot of those dollars that have been pumped into the economy are now being taken back into the Federal Reserve. And they are taking back from where? From places like Indonesia. So the dollars that were coming into Indonesia to buy stocks, to buy bonds, those dollars are now going back into the US, and what that does is it puts a lot of pressure on the prices of those stocks and bonds. So you see the stock market coming down, the price of the government bonds going down, and the yields going up, and the rupiah also under pressure. So that has to do with this monetary policy experiment that we talked about, and the money going out of emerging markets and back into the vaults of the advanced economy central banks. And then finally, it's important to look at this issue of contagion, because still, even back from the 1980s crisis, the 97 crisis, there's this idea that if one emerging market economy has problems, then people start getting scared that there will be problems with all emerging market economies. So even though a country like Indonesia actually has fairly prudent policies, the fact that Turkey or Argentina, I'm from Brazil, so we have this rivalry with Argentina, we're not surprised that they're having some problems. They start having some devaluation and some problems financing their current accounts. So then investors get even more scared and move their money into what is considered more safe assets. And that tends to affect countries that actually have fairly good policies like Indonesia. And the chart on the left actually shows that this year's market contraction, because of what is happening with contagion, because of what is happening with interest rates in the US, has been more severe than it was in the taper tantrum. And I think that we can all remember the taper tantrum when the rupiah also devaluated quite significantly. But the capital outflows from emerging markets this year have been much larger than in the taper tantrum of 2013. So this is the global economy of 2018, 2019, and some of these big trends of what might be happening next year with respect to growth, and how the trade wars may affect growth of the global economy, and how the increase in interest rates will actually put pressure on the capital flows globally. So now let's also look at tomorrow's global economy beyond 2018, 2019, and some of the kind of longer term trends, and what are the risks and opportunities associated with those. So let's get started right away on the fact that the world is aging, right? I think that we talk about the demographic dividend. That's because Indonesia still, as you can see there, a fairly young country. The median age, that's the age of the typical Indonesian, right in the middle of the age distribution. It's only about 29 years old. In China, that's almost 37. In Thailand, it's over 36. In Japan, it's much older. In the US, it's about 37. So the world is aging, and the workforces of a lot of these older countries are also aging, which means that there are actually fewer people to manufacture things. So when we think about the robots, and I think that you have all heard about the robots taking over the jobs, actually the first place where the robots go is where the labor forces are aging. There's some very interesting research that actually shows that. So Indonesia is not probably the first country where the robots are going to start coming for jobs, but they are already coming in places like China and places like Japan. At the same time, those aging societies have more retired people, there's more demand for healthcare, there's more demand for leisure, so there are also opportunities that come with aging. The second kind of big trend going forward is that even as some of these societies age, the global middle class is increasing, including in Indonesia. So these are some of the projections of the size of the global middle class. And some new projections estimate that by 2030 there will be over 5 billion people in the global middle class, which is a very significant increase from where we are today. So what that means is that this global middle class will continue to demand goods and services, despite the slower population growth that we saw from the previous trend. So on the one hand, there are fewer people, but the people who are currently in the global economy are becoming wealthier and actually able to demand more goods and services, more trips to visit Indonesia, more furniture made in Indonesia. So there are a lot of opportunities that come from this rising middle class. However, the other trend that we see in terms of production, so what is the production that is going to be taking place to meet the demand of this growing middle class? It tends to be more skills intensive, whether this is in global value chains, right? Global value chains are these integrated production networks that take place in many countries. ASEAN has a lot of those. They are more knowledge intensive. They actually employ fewer people, and the people that they employ are actually more educated. And the same thing is on services. So people talk about the fact that manufacturing is not creating as many jobs. Many of the future jobs are going to be in services. Are those going to be the low value added services, or the kind of services that can actually bring productivity growth? It's very possible there are a lot of services that are highly productive. I think that we have the example of the Philippines that has grown a lot through services, but those services actually require high levels of skills. They require people who can speak multiple languages, they require people who can problem solve. So the skills requirement of tomorrow's economy are changing very rapidly. So now 2 more slides. What are some of the opportunities that these trends create? So the first is that the current account deficit, and Indonesia is now all worried about the current account deficit and the rupiah 15,000, what is happening with the currency. This is a good opportunity to see that what is needed is to increase exports. This idea that you're going to reduce imports to control the current account is actually only one side of it. And as you can see, there's actually a need for imports in order for the country to export. So if Indonesia is exporting more, and it's attracting more investments in export-oriented industries, and that can be in goods and services, so it can be in tourism and it can be in manufacturing, that will actually help with the current account, and that makes it a good opportunity for Indonesia to reform and attract some of these investments. Replacing Chinese exports to the US, we heard about that actually there's a wave of opportunity for investments from Chinese companies or from companies that want to access the US market. Given the trade wars, they might reallocate to different countries. As well as increasing this exports to the growing middle class that we talked about, and there are a lot of opportunities that Indonesia can take advantage of. So since I'm already a little bit over time and I want to have a discussion, my final slide is on the risks. So what will it take in order to capitalize on these opportunities, and what are the risks that a country like Indonesia may not be able to take advantage of these opportunities? So first, the first question that people ask is there going to be some kind of a financial crisis? And I really don't think that that's the case. I think that Indonesia's macroeconomic policies are very sound. Indonesia has learned a lot from the '97 crisis, it has learned from the taper tantrum, and I think that in terms of the financial security of the country, that's quite safe. However, what that means is that you have a strong commitment of the government to tighten monetary policy, to raise interest rates, to reduce the fiscal deficit, and that may actually affect short-term growth in order to maintain that stability. But I think that, again, from the perspective of the World Bank, we're more concerned about what are the challenges to long-term growth. And that's where we actually are more concerned that certain measures like delaying infrastructure investments, those things may actually have unintended consequences, because Indonesia has a very large infrastructure gap. So there's a need to invest more, not less, on infrastructure, and there's a need to actually bring in more of the private sector to help with this infrastructure gap. The productivity gap, that's the fact that actually I have some slides on that, so why don't I show the productivity gap? The last one? Yes. So here, for example, wages in Indonesia are half of what they are in China. But productivity is also half of what it is in China. So the labor costs in Indonesia are the same as what it is in China, with China having double the salaries. So this is what I mean by a productivity gap. There's a need to actually make Indonesian firms more productive. And how do you make Indonesian firms more productive? Through more predictable regulation and through more competition, which includes actually bringing in more foreign investment, more externally oriented foreign investment that will increase exports and will increase competitiveness on the economy, which will raise productivity and help close some of that productivity gap. So now if I can go back to finish with something that is extremely important, which is the human capital gap. And this was the human capital index that the World Bank just launched in Bali. Indonesia has a human capital index of about 0.53. I've yet to learn exactly what the 0.53 means, but what you can see clearly here is that there's a very significant gap between where Indonesia is and even the average of other emerging economies, and a much larger gap with advanced economies. So if we go back to my previous point that both the kind of services that will be creating the good jobs in the future, the high-paying jobs in the future, as well as manufacturing within modern global value chains, they're becoming increasingly knowledge-intensive, closing this human capital gap, actually eradicating stunting so that all Indonesians have equal opportunities going forward, as well as building on improving the quality of basic education, and then retraining the people who are currently in the labor force are going to be very important to secure those opportunities that are posed by the trends that I showed earlier. So apologies for going over my time, but I will close here. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks a lot, Frederico. So now, what do you see? I'm not going to ask you about America's part on the trade war. I'm not going to ask you about China's part on the trade war, what you think about China. I'm going to ask you what you think about China, and you what you think about America.
Where do you think China's going with this trade war? Very, very short. You gotta keep it short.
Well, I think that China is going to retaliate in some way or other as we go forward. I think that in the end we will sit down and we'll talk and we will work it out. As I said, I think that there's going to be a structural realignment, and so as a result of that structural realignment, I think some of the pressures on the two economies may be a little bit diminished.
Okay. What do you think from the American point of the trade war? Where is America going?
I think at the end of the day, I think both parties have to sit down and negotiate and then see if they can force something
Would you
out.
talk to Trump about that? Tell him that, Trump, you need to sit down.
Personally, I'm actually not too pessimistic about this prospect.
Great.
Because we've seen the U.S. really starting trade tensions with a lot of other countries, but eventually something was worked out. So I see no reason why the United States and China cannot work something out.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Mrs. Cesar. Please have your mics, please, everyone. So you could please jump in anytime you would like. We have a relation, Indonesia and Philippines. Do you share the same optimism, especially as you said, when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers, right? So do you think that we're going to suffer, or do you think that what their opinions are going to take place before it actually affects us?
Well,
Oops.
we are actually the mouse on top of the elephant. So our job is to make sure that we don't fall off the elephants. Kidding aside, I think the U.S. doesn't see the region as a threatening region. And therefore, we can use this to our advantage. Plus the fact that with the labor wage inflation in China, there's really a natural push to move some of the production out of China. So ASEAN, if it plays its card right, can actually position itself as the recipient of that, those that want to avoid the sanctions on China. On the other hand, also, we should take advantage of this as a way to shift our production from intermediate goods to final consumption goods.
Okay.
So instead of sending intermediate goods to China, complete them in ASEAN for sale outside and within. Because there's one important statistics that really offers opportunity for ASEAN. The intra-ASEAN trade, the trade between us, is only around 24%.
Okay.
So if we're able to increase that, no, that should give us additional momentum for growth.
You've been in the government as well, and you see how the economy is going. What's making it so slow, this ASEAN community? Actually, not caring about whatever goes on with China and America. You know what? We could sustain ourselves. What's making governments slow on actually building this community stronger?
Well, our politics, their domestic politics.
Domestic politics, okay.
Because in any integration, there will be winners and losers.
Yeah.
And there are vested interests in each country, whether businesses or professions. Now, for example, in the trade in services, it's been quite slow, the mobility of labor.
Yeah.
We're, I think, only on 8 professions. It doesn't really make sense. We should get the best in each field. No? For example, in the Philippines, we still prevent foreign teachers from coming in freely when you'd like more qualified teachers to teach your students. So it's a vested, it's what I call alignment. No? In fact, I mentioned earlier opportunity in the information revolution. Opportunity 4.0. Our institutions, our politics are at 1.0, 2.0, our education at 3.0. We need to lift them. Our infrastructure is probably 2.0 or 3.0.
Yeah.
So we need to align them to 4.0.
Okay.
And that's what we need to do.
Okay. Now, one part was preparing the capital, the human capital for tomorrow. When we talk about trade wars, this is probably my last talk about trade war. How is it going to hurt? Of course, a lot of people here are going to be out there looking for jobs. They're expecting that ASEAN would open up their job companies, their companies to accept workers from all over ASEAN. Is it going to be more competitive? Are we ready? What do you think to make us prepared, especially when there's technology? When technology, robotics kicks in, it's going to be hard for the next workforce.
No, it's true that the competition is going to be greater, but I think that the opportunities are there, and I think that the statistics show that the people with a good level of education, they will find opportunities. They will still have to work hard, and it may not be as easy as one might hope for, but I think that the opportunities are there. And it also needs to be complemented. I mean, I think that, as Secretary Purisima was saying, there needs to be a complementarity of having the right factors of production, so having the skills is going to be very important, but having the competitive the regulatory side more open to actually create the opportunities for people to find those jobs is going to be equally important.
Okay. Trying to speak about Indonesia before I go to you, sir. You said we saw there what the World Bank said that the human capital index in Indonesia is actually bad. It's at the bottom half. So if we don't prepare skilled workforce, especially if we don't focus on the service factor or service industry, what's going to happen? What would you say?
I think that there will be continued jobs in kind of low value-added, low retail services, but those are not going to be able to fulfill the aspirations of a society that has, social media, that sees, what are the kinds of aspirations that they have. So I think that is actually socially a very dangerous phenomenon if people do not have the right skills to actually meet what their aspirations are.
Okay.
So I think that it's actually very important, both in terms of for the development of the country, but as well as for the social fabric, that people have the right kind of skills and that they're equipped with the right skills to meet their aspirations.
Okay, you wanted to add, Mike?
Well, I was just going to say that if you don't have the right skills here or you don't have the means to get the skills, people are going to leave. You're going to have a brain drain.
Okay.
I mean, that's what Malaysia is seeing, and there are other places around ASEAN and around the world where that's one of the reasons a lot of people want to go to the U.S. because the regulatory environment there is free enough for them to do what they want to do. But having said that, I think that ASEAN is beginning to really take seriously the education part of the digital economy. I was traveling in a cab in Singapore the other day, and the cab driver, he had a little bit less grayer hair than I do, but not much. And he said, "Hey, I'm getting off work in about in a half an hour because I have to get to my computer class." I said, "What?"
Oh, wow.
he said, "Yeah, the government says that in the future we're not going to need so many taxi drivers, but we're going to need a lot of people who can code. So I'm going to school to learn coding."
Wow, he's going places there.
But I mean, there are campaigns in Singapore, you know, saying, "Go back, get your skills up because the automation is coming, and we are going to change it." Malaysia, same thing. We just finished a business mission there, and that is one of the big pushes of the new government is, you know, reintroduce English language training because that's the language of an awful lot of the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that it's happening around, and you've got your own, the 1,000 Startups program that you've got. That is a great idea. I don't know how well it's working out, but it's a great idea because you've got it will start up the ecosystem. Indonesia already has got 6 unicorns, which is a record, I think, within ASEAN. I don't know of anybody else who's got that many. So you've got the talent, you've got the entrepreneurial spirit. This is where the public-private partnership between government and industry, between government and the people, really can make a huge difference.
Got to work together. You want to add something to that? So we were talking about robotics and China as well, because it's an aging population as well as in China, and robotics could maybe take place of the workforce, and this could probably, you know, hit countries like Vietnam and other countries who still rely on heavy labor, when actually other countries has already adopted robotics, and they could those businesses, the industries could go back to China when they adopt robotics. Very short before I throw it to the floor. You want to add something?
No, just echoing what you just said about, I think China is very active in terms of promoting robotics, but I think robotics is not really a new word. I think it's been around for decades already. Like Japan was one of the pioneers. I think what's happening right now, or what's different from before, is that people are talking about artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah,
that is very different from conventional robotics because we're dealing in different dimension of issues here. And then if machines learn and then how to strike a balance between artificial intelligence and how we just use machines to let us become more productive.
All right. Actually, my time is up. I'll just take one question and a quick answer from, the very front. Please be very short in your questions. There.
Good afternoon to the panelists and the moderator. Thank you for the opportunities. I'm Fitria from Tugu Insurance Pertamina, and I want to ask, since the trade war of US to China and to other country is getting tense, will WTO take part, or is there any policy from WTO to reduce the tense of the trade war? Thank you.
All right. Where does WTO step in about the trade war?
WTO is already involved.
Okay.
There are at least 3 cases against the United States for the 232, the trade tariffs on steel and aluminum. The United States has filed WTO cases against people who have retaliated against the United States. There are several cases that are going on within the WTO. The nature of the dispute settlement mechanism within the WTO is such that it's going to take a very long time, and unfortunately there is some institutional issues which are caused by the United States, I'm afraid, which means that the dispute settlement mechanism is going to be even less effective. Many people around the world in the trading organization are all saying it is time to reform the WTO, and I would look forward to saying that is going to happen. Whether it's going to be enough to hold the WTO together or not, I don't know. I would hope so.
Okay.
I would hope so, especially if it waits until after a change of government in some of the places around the world.
Okay,
just a quick one. Actually, the U.S. cut off the arm of WTO by not sending people to actually occupy the vacant positions in the arbitration offices. So there's no one to actually man the, and resolve the cases.
Okay, you agree with that, Mike? Okay. Okay. Anybody else want to add to that? Yes, please.
Can I make one final comment?
Sorry?
Can I make one final comment?
Yeah, sure. Please do.
So on this issue of jobs and human capital, I mean, I think that I just want to reinforce the point about the importance of openness for labor mobility. That many of your jobs may actually be in the Philippines or may actually be in Thailand. But to the extent that if you think that you're just trying to protect your borders, I think that nationalism needs to be what is best for Indonesians. And what is best for Indonesians is often to be open so that you can actually get your opportunities abroad and at the same time offer opportunities for the talent to come into Indonesia and create more jobs for Indonesians.
All right. Final comments, Mike?
Just finally, I totally agree with that comment. Labor mobility is huge, and it's going to be even more, but the regulatory coherence or looking at regulatory frameworks is going to be critical going forward, because if you're not digital friendly, you can have all the labor mobility you want, but you're not going to have the jobs to get them.
Final comments, Cesar.
Since the ASEAN Secretariat is in Jakarta, I think we should change the way we fund the ASEAN Secretariat from equal share to based on capacity. Because if we keep it at equal share, we stunt the growth of the Secretariat because it will be based on the capacity of the poorest of us. So we should follow the UN way of based on capacity.
Okay.
We need a stronger Secretariat to help all of us.
Thank you. Your final comment, Tristan.
My comment is very short, is that we really need to focus on structural reforms instead of doing fiscal or monetary stimuluses. Because right now, the Federal Reserve is trying to raise interest rates, but in other parts of the world, in developed world, interest rates are still zero or even below zero. So right now, but that already caused a lot of pain in emerging markets. When interest rates go up across the board, across the developed world, and then I think the pain will multiply. So we have to be careful about that. We have to be vigilant and to prepare for the next downturn. And then structural reforms are really sorely needed in terms of labor, in terms of welfare, in terms of trade.
All right, I already took up extra 5 minutes. Please give a round of applause to all the panelists. Tristan, Mike, thank you. Cesar, thank you very much. Frederico, thank you for your time. Thank you. My name is Timothy Marbun. Thank you.